My name is Robert Colyn. In Dutch, you say Colyn. I Americanized the pronunciation in Colyn. I'm in presently California on the West Coast in a city called Salinas. And my age is 98. I was born in a city in what today is called Indonesia. I was born in what at the time was called Batavia. It was a good-sized town, but it was had a very European aspect of it because of the Dutch having built up that area as the center of what we call today Indonesia. But at the time that I was born, it was called the Netherlands East Indies. And the Dutch were in control and did all the administration of the islands, where it eventually became a colony, like it was fashionable for the European countries to have colonies. Just think of Britain, Great Britain, with its great colony, India, and all over the world. The Portuguese had colonies in Africa, Mozambique. And then, of course, there were the French with all sorts of colonies in Africa, like Morocco, Tunisia. And the Dutch had their colony for actually starting as officially as a colony after about 1550 up to 1600 on up to the end of World War II. That was the Dutch East Indies. And the Dutch moved from Holland and the Netherlands. Holland and the Netherlands is basically the same country. Holland is a part of the Netherlands. Those are two provinces, North and South Holland. And that little country had that enormous territory called today Indonesia. And how big is that? If you transpose Indonesia over the United States of America, it sticks out into the Pacific 600 more miles, and it sticks out over the Atlantic Ocean another 600 miles. It has thousands of islands. Some are big, like Sumatra, Borneo, Celebes, New Guinea, Java. Those are the big islands, and there are thousands of small ones together. And that country has about 200 some million people, mainly Muslim. The archipelago was first mainly Hindu from India, and then later became Buddhist. So those two religions have settled specifically in on the island of Java and later spread out over the rest of the archipelago. The reason that I was born on Java is that my father was an executive with the one and only shipping line called Royal Packet Line, the KPM, that connected all these islands of the archipelago. And that line, that shipping line, required people to be hired in the Netherlands. You know, like my dad, he finished his legal studies in Amsterdam and then was hired at the headquarters of the KPM settled in Amsterdam. And that was the procedure that went on in the Netherlands, hiring Dutch people for the Indies. And so my dad married in the Netherlands and then moved to the Indies, where the other headquarters was in Batavia. And the way the contract was between the employee and the company and other companies as well. This goes for Heineken, for the Royal Dutch Shell. So these big companies, they did their business in Indonesia rather than in Holland. There was no oil for the Shell Oil Company. That was in the Indies. And so my dad was then sent for a 6-year period to spend in the Indies. And then after 6 years, he would get back with his family for a full year of what we call verlof. You might call it recuperation vacation of 12 months, because you have to realize that Indonesia is right under the equator. The climate is so demanding that an European employee and his family were in great need of returning to the moderate climate of the Netherlands. And so the system worked like this: an employee and his family would spend 6 years in the tropics, go back to recoup basically in Europe, go back for a second 6-year stretch, return back to the Netherlands again, and then for the last time, the third stretch of 6 years, making it 18 years in the tropical heat. Then that person would return for the last time to the Netherlands, his motherland, and got retired before he was 50 years old, could start an entire new career. And that was the reward for having worked in the tropics. Now, when I lived there, and my parents, of course, there was no air conditioning. There was a fan, a General Electric fan that you could set in your house on a table and just kind of live with that. But there was no, we had in those years, no refrigerator like we have today. There was an ice box, and the blocks of ice were brought in on a daily basis by a Chinese deliverer. He sold the ice and made money. And by the way, the Dutch East Indies have a large population of Chinese immigrants, millions. They found Indonesia also a good country to immigrate to, but worked as coolies, as workers, and then moved up and built up their own careers in Indonesia. And there are indeed millions of Chinese descendants of the immigration hundreds of years ago. My parents married in 1924. Then the first child was born, my brother Hank, in the Netherlands. And as a young baby, he entered Indonesia when my dad started his job there. And I was born shortly thereafter, after they had arrived. And that was April 24, 1926. So when the first time the family went back on verlof, at that time I was about 6 years old. So my first entry into Europe was at that age, and I spent a year there. During the second stretch of 6 years, my dad went to work on the island of Sumatra on the east coast, not that far from where you today have Singapore. The east coast city on Sumatra was called Medan, and that was a 2 year period that he worked there. And so I went to school in first grade in Medan when I was 6 years old. Then, after 2 years on Sumatra, my father was transferred from Sumatra back to Java, back to Batavia. And there is where I went to second grade. The first grade was in Sumatra, in the city of Medan. And then the second grade on up till grade number 6 was in Batavia. Then in 1938, I entered the Netherlands because this time the family would move for the last 6 years. Later, in 39, back to the Indies for the last 6 year period. Well, the problem at that time was that Dutch parents living in Indonesia had to make a decision. What is it that you want to do, the parents want to do with their kids when they enter the teenage period of their life? And I was oftentimes a bit tragic because which family wants to split up, not only over a few miles, but thousands of miles, with the parents returning for the last stretch of 6 years. And they decided it was better for the education and also specifically for the health of their kids. The way I grew up as a youngster up till the 12th year, how do you cool off at night when it is very high humidity in the tropics that comes with being in the tropics? The monsoon time is terrible, and you have no air conditioning other than a fan. The way I fell asleep for years as a 5 and 6, 7, 8 year old boy was not lying down on my bed. The bed had a mattress, and that mattress was filled with kapok. Looks like a big fruit that opens up, and inside is kapok. And to describe that, kapok is used for life preservers, so that once you enter in the water, whether the ocean or whatever, the river, you float. It doesn't take on any moisture. So by lying on the kapok mattresses, you pretty soon were just lying down in your own sweat. In order to prevent that from happening, I went down on the floor, tile floor of the bedroom where I slept with my brother, and my naked back, I pressed that down onto the tile floor and then moved 3 or 4 times, leaving a wet spot on the floor. My mother would go to bed later at night, pick me up, and put me on the bed. And that went on for years. No wonder that I did not grow very well. I remained small for my age, and I'm still a rather small man as a result of not growing as a kid very well. I was the smallest in the classroom and all that. I was healthy, but it was not a pleasant way of living in the tropics. With me in the Netherlands, spending a year with my parents, they returned in the summer of 1939, leaving two boys, brother Henk and me, with a strange family in the sense that they were not family, they were not related, but they were recommended to my parents that this family, Velderhof, husband, wife, and 8 children. And they took in Dutch children when the parents separated from these children to return back to the Indies for the last 6-year stretch, leaving their 2 children with this family for 6 years. My mother was planning to come back to the Netherlands after 3 to be with her 2 boys for maybe 6 months and then join back with her husband because he would not come. I had also a sister. So when the family broke up, split up, 2 of the 3 children, brother Henk and me, stayed in Europe. My father and mother and sister, younger sister, went back to the tropics. Unfortunately, a month after they had returned, World War II started. A year later, in 1940, Hitler invaded all of Western Europe, of course, included Holland. There was no more contact between me and my parents. The Dutch were conquered by the Nazis in May of 1940. I was a teenager at that time, and that was not a very good time for anyone in Western Europe under the Nazi occupation. Paris under Nazis, Belgium under Nazis, and the rest of Europe all occupied by the Nazis. My experience going to school during the Nazi occupation was traumatic. The school had maybe 1,000 students. It was a big school. And since I could walk from the Velderhof home to the school in about 20 minutes, there was no need for busing and all that. So the problem in the Nazi time was that schools were taken over by the Nazi military for their garrison. So we had the school available for the students the first year until the moment that the Nazi occupation discovered a Roman Catholic boys' school and said, "Out you go. We go in with our troops." Our rector of the Lyceum was a very helpful man and offered his colleague, rector of the Roman Catholic boys' school, our building by saying, you come in the afternoon in this building, and we will compress the Lyceum group in the morning. So we started earlier in the morning and left at noontime to let the Roman Catholic school come in for the afternoon, which caused some problems because the Roman Catholic boys were leaving notes in the desks. Who sits here in the morning? And if it was a girl, we were mixed school, boys, and the gender was mixed. So there was love stories written between the two schools, whereupon the Catholic rector wanted to stop that and went to his colleague, the Protestant rector, and said, how can we stop this? And we were warned by our Protestant rector to stop the nonsense. And the girls were told not to respond to the correspondence and so on. Another setback for us was that a year later, the school building was occupied by the German military. So two schools were without buildings. And the administration of both schools needed to find a villa that was empty or another building that could host us for part of the program. It was very demanding for these both schools. And that was one thing that I felt was not helping me in my learning procedures. And oftentimes, going to school ended before I reached the school because of the alarm that was sound when airplanes were coming over on the way to Germany. And they would also bomb areas in the Netherlands. So you had to stop and either go home, back home, which was not so difficult for me because it was a short walk, but you'd like to be home instead of in school. That was one of the things that was not helpful either. There was a lot of interruption in learning during those years of the Nazi occupation. The problem, of course, occurred more when you reached the age of 18, because the Germans had a great shortage of workers in Germany. Their workers were at the front in Russia and later in France after the Normandy landings. And so the Germans forced males from Norway to Greece, all occupied by Hitler, to register for work. And at the age of 18, you had to register at the employment bureaus in the town where you lived, in this case, Haarlem. And then within a week, you were on the way by train mainly to the areas where you needed to work in aircraft factories, armament factories in Berlin, all over the German country. Now, the chances of returning alive were diminished because Germany at that time was being bombarded into smithereens, fleets of bombers by day and by night would cross my town, Haarlem. And these bombardments of Germany would not discriminate the people that dropped the bombs on. If you were working as slave labor in Berlin or anywhere else in Germany, you would go with where the bombs would explode. And that was a great danger for not coming back. So when I became 18 years old in April of 44, there was no invasion of Europe yet by the Allies. We were a couple of months short, April, June was the D-Day date. When I received a note in the mail, you have to register at the Employment Bureau of Haarlem, I knew that was for the reason of going off to Germany. And I didn't think that the German police, Gestapo, those were the guys that were doing all the roundups over occupied Europe, the Gestapo, Geheime Staatspolizei. So the shortening was Gestapo. And they were knocking on the door when you didn't register at the employment office. And therefore, I decided to go underground, find an address out of Haarlem, and stay away out of the hands of the Gestapo. But I was optimistic, and in April, I thought it takes probably half a year before they found out I didn't register. That was a miscalculation because I finished that school year, and then stayed at the Velderhof family in the summer vacation. I thought I'll go to my underground address, and I had one lined up with a farmer in the area of where now today the big airport of Schiphol is. Schiphol, Amsterdam. At that time, it was all farmland. Underdivers. They had the Dutch name onderduiker, underdiver. That means you disappeared. You left your hometown, wherever you were living, and then you found a place, usually at a farm, and you worked there on the farm, waiting for the eventual liberation of the Netherlands, which was already clearly in the make. It happened a year later, but that's how it went. July 10 was the time that they were picking me up in the middle of the night. I was sleeping in a bed that you could fold back towards the wall, and the bedroom had two beds. One was a sofa bed where my brother used to sleep when he had not left yet. He preceded me and went underground before the Germans would catch him. And so the bed was empty. His bed was empty. My bed was used by me. Now, picture this. It's the 10th of July. There is an enormous rainfall, lightning. It was one of those real bad summer storms that was hitting Haarlem. And I was warm at nighttime, and I had only a bikini on. It was, for the rest, I was uncovered. And it is midnight somewhere out there that the bell of the house bell was rung. You pull it out, and these are houses all built together, with one roof over all these, maybe 20 homes in a small dead-end street. And I'm deep in sleep when Mrs. Velderhof walked from her bedroom on the same floor towards the front of the house where I slept. She had the back side. I had my bedroom on the front side. She wakes me up and said, "Rob, they are here to pick you up." I hadn't heard the bell, but she woke up. Ring a ling a ling a ling a ling, and they pulled the bell. So we had rehearsed this, fortunately, a couple of times, and I was out of my bed in no time, walked out of my bedroom into her bedroom on the back side of the house, slid down rain drainage that really tore me up here in the middle, in my thighs. Ended up in the little yard, backyard, and then crossed into the neighbor's yard. She went downstairs, opened the door, and two men walked in. Outside was a motorcycle with a sidecar. So there were three people there picking me up. And I still, till today, I don't know whether they were in uniform or not. Mrs. Felderhoff said one seemed to be in a uniform, but I never saw them. Sitting out in the rain in her backyard. She let them in. They said, "It's Robert Colyn here." Whereupon this marvelous Christian woman, it's the best liar ever, she said, "You mean to say that he didn't register, that he should have in April? All I know is that he left for the employment office and he's not, and you're looking for him." Oh my gosh. She played very well her role. 56-year-old lady, and at that time a widow. The husband had died a year earlier. So they didn't take her excuse or shoved her out of the way, went up the stairs, and where is his bedroom? She guided them to the bedroom, and at that time there was a lightning flash, in the sky, and she sees my glasses on the shelf above the bed with books. So she has her hand on the shelf above the bed, which was flipped inside towards the wall. And they did, and it had a curtain in front of it. So she had also done that when I was running out of the house. And at that time, they were looking towards my bed, but didn't see a bed. They saw a curtain, and the glasses were in her sleeve. They looked towards my brother's bed. There was one bed in that bedroom. They didn't see two. They saw only one. And they went immediately with their hands into the cover, feeling if it was warm. Well, my brother had gone for last year, was as cold as it could be. And at that time, they realized that, there was no Robert Colyn in that bedroom. And they left after just talking to her, whatever they said, I don't know. Well, I'm now crossing from the backyard of Mrs. Felderhoff's house to the neighbor's house, which was on the corner of the little dead-end street and a good-sized road. All during the 5 years of occupation, there were no lights in the Netherlands or other occupied countries. They didn't like to show the overflying fleets of bombers, and up to 800 were coming over for endless rows of bombers on their way to Germany. There was no street lighting, only to prevent people that had a job to do at night, little slits of hardly any voltage, so that it wouldn't run into a big light pole, and that would not shine upwards, it would shine downwards. And that was, for me, not clear what it was. Was it a person smoking? But that was a very faint light. So I'm sitting underneath lawn furniture of the neighbor, having the lawn chair pulled over me because of that darn light that was swinging in the wind. And so there is a guy waiting to see if I would come out of the house and stop me from escaping. Well, it turned out to be the damn light that was on 24 hours a day for years. And it kept me in underneath this lawn furniture, just over me, till I had heard the motorcycle leave, but wasn't ready to go back home. I thought there is definitely someone waiting for me. So then I decided to walk away from the whole neighborhood, had to go through a ditch. I went underwater with watercress all over my body, and then crawl out of the ditch towards the tennis park on the way to an address that I thought might help me. They were a good friend of Mrs. Felderhoff. What I didn't know is that there was nettle on both sides. I didn't know it when I went through the ditch on the way to Mrs. I call her Skippers, Mrs. Skippers. Her husband was on anywhere on the 7 seas in the world. He was a captain, and he was on the ocean when the Nazis had invaded the Netherlands. So she was alone. And when I arrived there, walking up for maybe 10 minutes to reach her address, I stepped in a big pile of horseshit. There were no more automobiles in time of the Nazi occupation, no gas, no nothing. But so the grocer who dropped off the groceries had a horse and buggy, and there were a lot of horses on the street. Now, you can imagine that when I walked eventually up to her address, I just managed to step barefooted in a big pile of horse shit. Well, all that water just messing it up. And I pulled the bell. That was too much of a loud noise, and no one was allowed to be on the street for years in a row. From, let's say, and it changed the hours, from 11 at night till 6 in the morning, no one on the street. If you were caught by the Gestapo or other Nazi police, you were put in the police office, and then everything could happen to you at that time. So Mrs. Skippers opens up 3 stories high. These are all row houses. Opens up the window. Who's there? And I mentioned my name, and the window was closed again, and nothing happened. So I cling, cling, cling. I will go on again on ringing the bell, and then a store lower, the other window opens up, and Mrs. Skippers is there. Say, who's there? And you have to figure this in your mind also. Enormous of dogs and cats raining coming down, lightning, big thunder claps, So I thought, well, I don't get in here. And at that time, finally waiting in the door has a little opening in the door that opens up, and there is the face of Mrs. Skippers, and she recognizes me. She opens the door and let me in. I tell the story, and she said, "Oh, you smell bad." And I said, "Well, it's horse shit. It's only horse shit." And at that time, she took me to the bathroom. I got a shower and cleaned up. And then she put me to bed in the guest room she had up there. Well, when I was in bed and got warmer under the blanket, that nettle that was really burning me from feet to the neck. Terrible. That was bad news for me. And after that, she went to Mrs. Felderoff to say, Rob is in my house. And so Mrs. Felderoff was happy to hear that. And then I get to another address later on. So this is a good point to add that particular narrow escape. Yeah.